Dead space silence. A lovely metaphor, and like most poetic imagery, completely wrong. Of course, there are no sounds in the vacuum itself, nor can there be, since there is nothing for sound waves to propagate in. But it doesn't matter to us humans, as we are never exposed to the vacuum directly. A human needs something to breathe, meaning air is bound to be around us. Even in a spacesuit, something is constantly humming. Radio comm is crackling with statics, the air supply is buzzing, and the spacesuit fabric is rustling. The station or the ship is even noisier. Of course, the spaceship can't match the roar of marine engines, but it has enough of its own equipment to steal any remaining silence. One would be surprised that despite all the soundproofing, there is enough noise on the spaceship. The psychological danger of silence quickly became an obsolete concept. Such fear existed at the dawn of the space age. Who cares about the silence when you need to catch some sleep under the constant pressure of decibels? Especially when you have zero chance of ever hearing anything else. They say that the old solutions are the best. Earplugs were invented long before the first spaceship was built. As for me, I can bear some noise. I spent almost half my life on stations and ships where you can't sleep with earplugs. What if an alarm goes off? You get used to it. But now it doesn't matter. There are only two of us on the Lensman. One alive and one dead. It's a strange sensation to travel at mind-boggling speed through absolute emptiness in the company of a dead body. Honestly, Dr. Safronov was not a pleasant companion even when alive, but we got along somehow. In a year and a half, you get used to anybody. But the realization that a frozen corpse travels in the same ship with you, even if you were not involved in his death, gives your life a special surreal touch. I considered throwing Dr. Safronov's body overboard, but the gravitational cocoon created by Scanslow's engines would still prevent him from moving away from the ship, dragging him with the same acceleration as the Lensman. The thought of Dr. Safronov accompanying me outside the ship gave me real creeps, so I left him in the freezer. It is silly, of course, that I ponder such things when everything has lost its meaning. 26 more days, and it's all over, once and for all. But the human psyche is a tangled labyrinth in which many fears and regrets wander, unable to escape. And if one is lucky, some residual hopes flicker. Like ghosts, they walk the dark recesses of my mind, doomed to disappear with it. The main occupants of my head right now, though, are memories. They fill my nights with dreams of the streets of various cities I've been to. The wonderful, busy streets where many people rush about their business, return home from work, or simply stroll leisurely, happy or sad about the passing day. They flow through me as I do daily ship systems checks, as pointless as those checks are now, breaking into the clatter of familiar and forgotten voices. Maybe I could eliminate them by taking a strong sleeping pill, but I can't do that. I don't know if I have the moral right to do so, but I feel obligated to give them my due. Remember the humanity that no longer exists. Remember it to my own end. The last station to go silent was Ishtar. I checked the quantum communication terminal first thing every morning, but it blinked a faint green LED, indicating that no messages had been received since the last check. I knew what this meant and that there would be no miracle, but with the stubbornness of a looped algorithm, I repeated this simple action day by day. It had become a kind of silent, sanity-saving mantra for me. I even sent a check message, knowing there could be no response. The green light was somehow soothing, though I should have perceived it as the steady flicker of despair. 8 people were living and working at Ishtar station. Non-local communication is one of those cases where people actively use what they do not fully understand. At least the vast majority of them don't. Like me. I'm just an engineer. I know how our ship is built and how to repair any fails. But quantum mechanics is still beyond my understanding, despite the introductory course I took at the university. Even Dr. Safronov, the one and great Nobel laureate Viktor Safronov, who received his award for discovering the principle of quantum non-local communication, when I asked him to explain this principle at an accessible level, only smiled sadly and shook his head. Kaido, you're a good specialist, and I'm sure you would understand my explanation if possible. The problem is, I don't have one. He shook his head again, and I thought I saw a flicker of despair in his grey eyes. Since the beginning of the 21st century, for almost 100 years now, we've known and repeatedly confirmed experimentally that Bell's theorem cannot be used for the practical transmission of information faster than the speed of light. And then I set up this damned experiment. And it turns out you can. Safronov looked me straight in the eye, and I saw the flood of darkest thoughts boiling behind his stare. That's why we're here, he said, to figure out what we have actually stumbled upon. But I'm afraid we will end up studying a barrel of explosives by throwing burning matches at it. His words made an impressive impression on me. Even before my selection for Landsman's expedition, working on the cargo ship serving stations and settlements beyond Jupiter's orbit, I heard rumors of increasing friction between the Nobel laureate and Hawking University management. Allegedly, Dr. Safronov almost demanded that all research on non-local communication be immediately curtailed and all installations destroyed. I did not pay much attention to these rumors back then. So much weird stuff is circling around the net, and half of it is some apocalyptic mumbo-jumbo produced in an everlasting quest for ratings. But Dr. Safronov's words made me feel uneasy, like the burning matches at the gas station. Translating Dr. Safronov's poetic words into everyday language, Landsman's mission is mainly to experimentally test the possibilities of quantum communication. We had to determine at what distances it works, whether its efficiency drops, and so on. This science pleasure trip is insanely expensive, but given the potential capabilities, it's justified. Instantaneous communication, not limited by any distance. The dream of all space opera tyrants of the pulp sci-fi, even if it's limited so far to transmitting tiny packets of information. The main thing is to understand the principle, and then we will expand it. Now I understand why the respectable Nobel laureate went on a long, the project duration is 5 years, and risky expedition, together with the solid but not too famous spaceman, Kaido Rautsep. They must have been glad to get rid of Dr. Safronov. The dark prophecies of the genius are less likely to reach the public from outside the solar system. I remember very well the day when Earth stopped communicating. It was not an ordinary comm session. A series of experiments of transmitting and receiving extended packets of information was scheduled for that day. First, Earth was to communicate with the settlement on Pluto, and then with the Ishtar station in the Kuiper belt, and then with the Lensman. 5.5 light hours, 3 light weeks, 2 light months. Packets were sent to each receiver at 15-minute intervals after the Pluto session. A quarter of an hour was needed for additional data verification, just in case. After 16 minutes, the red LED on the panel blinked and the message appeared on the screen. Earth is silent. Sessions with Pluto did not occur, and no signals were coming. The Moon, Mars, Mercury, and Lagrange 1 and 2 station do not respond. Dr. Safronov, any thoughts? Robertson, Ishtar. I remember the look on Safronov's face. This must have been the look of a man who went to court to pay a parking ticket and learned that he had been sentenced to death, and the sentence would be carried out within an hour. He turned into the wax statue. Even his eyes completely glazed over. He was only 42 years old, but at that moment he looked like a 1,000-year-old mummy. After waiting a while, I touched his shoulder. Viktor Nikolaevich, I need to send an answer. Safronov didn't flinch, as I expected. He slowly turned his head and looked through me and beyond the ship's hull into the galactic expanse. Answer. Yes, answer. Tell them I need to think, to make some calculations. Tell them I'll be in touch. He looked at his watch. In 5 hours and 24 minutes. Until then, let them try to make contact. He stood up and walked uncertainly toward the exit. Try to contact who, Viktor Nikolaevich? Safronov looked me straight in the eye. Anybody who will answer, he said. If anybody still can. My next 5 hours were a pure essence of the surrealistic nightmare. All over the solar system, one by one, the quantum comms of planetary stations, artificial satellites, mining villages in the asteroid belt, and those ships equipped with the quantum communication went silent. No one understood anything. Why were the installations shutting down? What could it be related to? The specialists in non-local communication were a scarce breed. Most lived on Earth or in inner system settlements, with which there was no communication anymore. I tried several times to call Dr. Safronov, but he locked himself in his quarters and did not answer. He appeared on the comm bridge precisely 5 hours and 24 minutes later, exactly 3 minutes after Pluto had fallen silent. Like a rusted robot, he walked to the control panel and lowered himself into his chair at the terminal. Is Pluto finished? He asked without looking at me. Yes, I answered hesitantly. Viktor Nikolaevich, what is going on? Safronov pulled the keyboard to him and started typing. On the screen, one by one, the words appeared. Jalen, I'm sorry. I was right. It's a phase transition. I'm sorry about what happened. I warned you. Safronov, Lensman. Send it to Ishtar, Safronov said, getting up. And go to bed. There's nothing more we can do here. 3 days later, Dr. Safronov committed suicide. He had been dead for at least a few hours when I found him. On the shelf by the bed, I found several empty drug packages. I didn't bother to check what it was. What difference did it make now? Even aspirin can be used as poison if you want to. By then, I'd found the message he'd left in the central database. Kaido, I'm sorry to tell you this in absentia, But I'm afraid I just didn't have enough strength to face you. Even now, I can hardly bring myself to type these words, though my confession is irrelevant. The fact is that we have just destroyed our universe. The process has just begun and will take a very long time, but it is inexorable and irreversible. And all of this because arrogant humans have tried to outwit the laws of nature. Have you ever heard the theory that the vacuum of our universe is not a true vacuum, but a false one? I don't know how to explain it so you can understand. In short, according to this theory, our universe exists in a metastable state that can potentially transition into another one, called a true vacuum. If this transition happens, all matter will be destroyed, and what would be formed, it's hard to explain. We don't know it exactly. But anyway, it doesn't matter now. Do you understand already? Our attempts to pierce the very essence of our universe, to make it easier to pass silly notes, interact with its deepest foundations. For a while, our attempts were successful, but when we increased the power, we failed. We ended up doing something that triggered the process. No one will ever know what it was, because there would be no one to find out. It all started on Earth at the new experimental installation of increased power. Weak consolation, of course, but no one felt or understood anything. The phase transition of vacuum arose at one point and began to spread at the speed of light. The solar system doesn't exist anymore, only a vast expanding bubble of nothingness, for which we don't have either mathematics or even words to describe. I guess the Einstein was right. God doesn't play dice, but he must get angry when someone still tries to play him with cheats and tricks. I know it's silly in our position, but I don't feel strong enough to live even the days we have left before the phase transition border catches up with us. So forgive me for this weakness. 8 people on Ishtar and 2 here. By my action, I am reducing the remaining humanity by 1/10. But I cannot do otherwise. Farewell. I don't know what Robertson did on Ishtar, whether he told his colleagues or withheld the truth. We didn't bring it up during the communication sessions. Robertson was not a specialist in quantum communication or vacuum physics. He was an astrophysicist. Still, he was an old friend of Safronov, and most likely Viktor Nikolaevich shared his concerns with him in the past. Robertson and I agreed not to report anything to the other remaining stations. There was no use in such information, only the ocean of despair. One by one, they fell silent, until we were the only ones left, the Lensman and the Ishtar station. Our strange communication continued for a week, a conversation of the last people condemned to a delayed dispatch to oblivion. Now I was alone. You can't really find silence on a spaceship. But what could be more silent than the realization that you are the last living being in a doomed universe?